talk will be on why believing in free will is important. So join me in welcoming Stuart.
I'm going to try the art of the microphone. We'll see how it goes. Okay. I'm going to talk to you today about the benefits of believing in free will, in that we have the ability to choose where to place our attention. I use very similar reasoning to Pascal's wager. Blaise Pascal was a French philosopher and mathematician from the 17th century. He argued that if we believe in God, we stand to gain. If it turns out that God doesn't exist, we haven't lost anything. But if we choose not to believe and God does exist, then we stand to lose. Today, I argue that by believing in free will, we stand to gain the lives we each desire, individually and collectively in our own way. I will try to show what we are responsible for, what we're not responsible for, and why we can still say that we're free in a world where we clearly don't control everything. If life is a river, and each human being is a canoe, in their own canoe on that river, then we can't control whether or not we hit rapids. But we might be able to affect how and where we hit those rapids if we paddle. Let's begin by observing that human beings create things. We create tools and technology. We create relationships between people and organizations and governments. We create art and knowledge, oppression and justice, peace and war, happiness and suffering. Even though one individual human being is quite limited, humanity is capable of creating quite a bit. And we have made history. So what is it that controls what we create, or what our behavior, and therefore what we end up creating? There's a lot of evidence, a lot of research suggesting that there are biological factors. In fact, there's a lot of research suggesting that there are at least sociological and psychological and environmental factors as well. These factors are like the current of the river, pulling us in our boats downstream. None of these factors preclude the possibility of us also being free-willed. That is to say, paddling might matter. This talk is entitled, Why Believing in Free Will Matters. To be clear, it's not are we free-willed and does that matter? If it was, I might discuss the Western philosophical tradition from the ancient Greeks through Heidegger, or I might discuss the Western psychological tradition from Freud through Adler, Frankl, and the behaviorists. If we got to the end of either of those discussions, we would have to conclude that it's not clear whether we're free or determined. The topic of this talk, and what I can tell you for sure, is that it behooves us to believe that we are. If it turns out that the nature of being human is that we're determined, when we aim to make choices, nature will limit us before we've begun. We lose nothing. This also means that we're not responsible for our circumstances. We're not responsible for what we create, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about either of those things. We're just along for the ride. This is like saying that although we notice ourselves paddling, the paddling doesn't make any difference as to how or where we hit the rapids. But I say we have everything to gain by believing that we're free-willed, because although a human being has finite power, that power can be applied to any of the circumstances that human finds themselves in. And we must find ourselves responsible for our part in every aspect of our circumstances. Right here, I want to be careful about two things. The first one is what I mean by responsibility, and the second one is what I mean by free will. By responsibility, I mean the ability to respond in the future. I've often heard responsibility equated with blame as someone looks back at their life and tries to account for the cause of their circumstances. If a group of people on a day-long hike find that their lunches aren't with them at lunchtime, they might try to figure out who is responsible. Did someone leave the lunches? Did someone take the lunches? In other words, they're looking for someone to blame for their circumstances. When I talk about responsibility, I'm talking about the fact that each of those people have an ability to respond to those specific circumstances. They could look for someone to blame, but they could also look for something to eat, and they could remember that although they're uncomfortable, they won't die from lack of food in the day. By free will, I mean the ability to change one's own mind. That is, the ability to choose the mental stance or attitude that we take towards our circumstances. I do not mean strong free will. Strong free will means power over circumstances, like the ability to change the temperature at will, to make lunch appear out of thin air, or to change your mood to happiness just because you want to. By free will, I mean what Viktor Frankl meant, which is to say that the one thing that can never be taken away from us, because it is part of our very being, is our ability to choose our mental stance towards our circumstances. Free will has its foundation in our ability to choose our attitude. Now again, I want to be very clear that we cannot control circumstances. Inner conditions, like emotions, might not seem like circumstances, but in this case, they fit the description. If we see something that appears disgusting, we can't just will ourselves to feel that it is delicious. It's absurd. It may be that you find the idea of a peanut butter pickle mayonnaise sandwich disgusting. You wouldn't be alone. If the contents of your consciousness strike you as repulsive, they do so for a reason. For many of us here, it may be that we're not in the habit of combining peanut butter, pickles, mayonnaise into a sandwich. From an evolutionary perspective, an organism that has a disgust reaction to new foods is less likely to ingest a lethal amount of something that's gone bad, or simply wrong, as the case may be with a peanut butter, pickle, mayonnaise sandwich. What we have the power to do is choose where to place our attention. If you try this sandwich, you can focus on the actual experience, or you can focus on the disgust reaction you had prior to the experience. If you like sweet and sour chicken, I can almost guarantee that a peanut butter pickle mayonnaise sandwich isn't as bad as it sounds. Let me give you a more tangible example of exercising free will. When I began high school, I had a specific belief. You could say my attention was fixated on a specific way of interpreting my experiences. I believed that I had to pick one school and stick with it for 4 years to complete high school. Turns out, the school that I was at, I was pretty unhappy. And my family tried to convince me that I didn't have to stay there, but I refused to change my mind. That is the seed of free will. I refused to change my mind, and there was nothing they could do about that. They could have forced me to go to another school, but without my participation, my mind wasn't going to change. This was like saying that for some reason I believed that I had to run the river only on the right side to get downstream. If I strayed over onto the left, I wouldn't get there. My family could have used their boats to shunt my boat over onto the left, but I still would have believed that I had to be on the right. Somewhere in my second year, I'd had enough, and I changed my mind. I decided that just because I valued completing high school didn't mean I had to stay at one school for 4 years. And the next 2 years were a completely different experience. And yes, it was because of where I was and who I was with and what we were doing. And none of those things would have been a part of my experience had I not first changed my mind. Again, my folks could have forced me to go to that new school without my participation. But without my participation, my mind never would have changed. And because I was the one that made the choice, I actually had to change my attitude before I could move ahead with that decision. In this way, my mindset made a whole new experience possible. Even though I wasn't in control of my circumstances, they were a part of my experience because I had changed my mind. If life is a game, then the rules are that we might be free-willed, and nobody told us. Paddling might matter, but nobody knows for sure. It's possible that each individual is ultimately the only one who has control over their attitude. And whatever attitude we choose is the foundation of the experiences we create. So be a bit idealistic, because what have you got to lose? Now, I know of no way of proving to you or myself that we're free-willed. But I know of no way of proving that we're not. What I can say is that if we are, I possess the potential to change my attitude, even if it's really difficult. I can also say that no one else can do it for me. No one else can paddle my boat for me. I will leave you with this, that no one will be able to tell you for sure whether or not you're free-willed. So live your life like an experiment. Do the opposite of what you would just because you can, and make up your mind for yourself. And remember not to doubt if it gets difficult. Please don't think that because I argue that we're free, do I think that anyone's life is easy, or should be easier than it is. Taking responsibility for all aspects of a life is a very difficult thing for anyone to do, but it frees us to ride out more wave trains and hit fewer rocks, because it means we are more likely to pay attention to the one aspect of our lives no one else can touch, our attitudes. And with the right attitude, life can be experienced as right and good. The desire to create this experience is a start, but it's not enough. To be effective at creating a desirable experience, we need the wisdom and the will. We need the wisdom to understand how it may be done, and we need the strength to do it. Just because I decide to ride a bicycle doesn't mean that I know how or that I'm strong enough. But just because I lack strength and know-how doesn't mean that I never will. Remember that difficulty is not proof that we're not free-willed. Remember that the way the wisdom and the will are developed is by continuing to choose an open-minded attitude despite a lack of instant gratification. It was this attitude that created the light bulb, that crossed oceans, that put humanity in space, and made possible all the accomplishments of our world today, for better or for worse. The potential that each human being lives with, every instant of their lives, is the ability to choose where to place their attention to influence their attitude. Free will affects attitude. Attitude impacts what we're able to do. What we're able to do impacts what we do to, for, and with each other and the world. So I implore you, even though I can't prove anything to you, act like you're free-willed. Learn as much as you can about how your attitude, the belief with which you guide your experience, affects you and those around you, and together we will create an experience of life more worth living.